Our subject matter is wealth. We thus begin by being clear why wealth is important, what, for the purposes of economic analysis, is meant by the term wealth, and what is not meant by the term. Wealth is important because it includes all the material goods that people value and are essential to human life, well-being and happiness. It includes all items of food, shelter and clothing, as well as material goods that people use to develop and refine skills and talents that help them to realise their intellectual, aesthetic and spiritual potential. So, by way of a definition for wealth, we can say that all wealth consists of natural materials that have been secured, moved, combined and or altered by human exertion such that they are capable of gratifying a human need. A well-recognised quality of wealth is that it is always valued. Less commonly recognised, however, is that not everything that is valued is wealth. People and human powers may be highly valued, but for the purposes of economic analysis, they are not wealth. Likewise, nothing that nature alone provides is wealth. For example, space, air, water, sunshine, earth, the electromagnetic spectrum, DNA, natural sources of energy and power are not wealth. Most importantly, for the purposes of economic analysis, money is not wealth. Money is valued as a medium of exchange. It is used to buy things with. And if it can be trusted to fulfill this function, it needs no other quality. Pure money is not wealth, but may be exchanged for wealth. Over the years, money has come in many forms: gold, silver, cattle. In times of war and prisoners used cigarettes as money. So the forms that money may take may be wealth, but money as money is not wealth. Some other things that, for the purposes of economic analysis, are not wealth, even though at different times and places some people may value them very highly, include various socially created property rights, such as patents, copyrights, trademarks, monopoly and other privileges and licenses, offices of state or status. Celebrity status would be a modern example. None of these things are, for the purposes of economic analysis, wealth. All items of wealth are thus a product of labour applied to land. But note, neither labour, humans, human resources, nor land, nature, natural resources, nor money, nor socially created property rights are included in the economic term wealth. The value of both wealth and non-wealth items represents the regard or worth that a person attributes to it. It is measured by what the person is prepared to give in order to protect, secure, preserve or possess it. Effectively, their labour, but usually via a medium of exchange, money. For an item of wealth that many people can produce, it will be directly linked to the costs of producing a like item, that is, little more than the earnings of labour and capital employed in producing a like item. For an item that is not wealth, however, Its economic or exchange value has a quite different basis. The economic value of a monopoly privilege, for example, does not relate to the earnings of any labour or capital employed in producing it. They are normally zero or negligible anyway. Its value arises because people need or want it and are willing to render exertion or pay to get it. Such privileges only arise because of certain socio-economic arrangements that particular societies adopt at a particular time. The obvious question to arise here is, to whom is this economic value due? The answer is equally obvious. It is due to the society that creates it. We shall now move on to explore the importance of this in connection with the most basic monopoly privileges that is a feature of current socio-economic arrangements in our country and throughout the world. Having clarified what, for the purposes of economic analysis, we mean by the term wealth, and what we do not mean by the term, we move on to consider the production of wealth. We shall use this model or diagram. It shows the three key players involved in the production of wealth in a modern society. That is, a person, either an individual person or a group of persons, for example a firm or corporate person, the society of which that person is a part, and the whole of the natural world or nature other than our person or society. We show what each of these three players contribute to the production of wealth. Our person contributes their labour and capital. And by their labour, we mean their physical, intellectual, emotional, or aesthetic powers. And by their capital, we mean the wealth that they use to produce more wealth. Nature we show as providing land, being all the space, air, water, sunshine and earth, and all natural substances, organisms and powers that nature provides. It includes all natural materials and powers that every person depends upon in order to live or produce anything, that is excluding human powers. Society we show providing people, protection, law and order, permissions, privileges and services. People contribute by enabling specialisation and enlarging the scope for personal development. Society provides protection, security, law and order, security of tenure of places. It also provides conservation of land quality in the interests of all people and other creatures, present and future. These may be implemented through land use permissions and prohibitions. Society also provides public and private goods and services. We move on to consider the primary division of wealth. Using the same model that we've used for the production of wealth, we now seek to identify that portion of the wealth that will be divided between the labour and capital provided by people and the land provided by nature, but which is accessed by people through the systems that the society develop. The return to labour and capital, in economic terms, is styled earnings. The return to land is styled rent. Earnings represent that portion of the value added to wealth produced that is due to the people who provide the labour and capital employed in its production. That portion that goes in rent is the value a person is willing to pay for the privilege of exclusive and secure possession and or use of a portion of land for a given period. This diagram is intended to illustrate one of the economic advantages that people enjoy as a consequence of being part of a wider society. It illustrates the benefits of cooperation. The green blocks indicate the value added or wealth produced per unit input of labour and capital for an individual working alone. To this is added a red block indicating the additional value added per unit input of labour and capital as a consequence of cooperation. The blue blocks represent the average wealth produced per person as part of a community. We show here only a 5-person community, but it provides an indication of the benefit of cooperation. When the community becomes still larger, the scope for specialisation, or the division of labour, increases, and people are then better able to develop specialist skills and areas of knowledge for the benefit of all people. This difference in the capacity to add value as a consequence of the presence of more or less people is most obvious in the difference between an urban community and a rural community. In an urban community, there is much scope for cooperation and specialisation, whilst in a rural community there's far less scope for cooperation and specialisation. Hence, the value added per unit input of labour and capital, and indeed of area of land, in an urban community, or prime sites, is much greater than in a rural community or marginal sites. These differences manifest in the rent of land. In a rural or marginal location, there's very little rent of land. In an urban or prime location, there's very much rent of land. What we show here is this primary division of the value added between the rent of land on the one hand and the earnings of labour and capital on the other. We move now to consider public revenue, that is, the value of what public authorities collect for communal purposes. Under current arrangements, this is invariably through taxation, and we should define a tax. It represents a compulsory contribution imposed by a public authority, irrespective of the exact amount of service rendered to the taxpayer in return, and not imposed as a penalty for any legal offence. Most taxes today represent taxes on production. We tax labour, we tax capital, we tax sales, we tax profits, we discourage production. We increase the price of things that people buy and reduce the returns to the people who sell. A key message from this briefing is that these taxes represent an unnecessary evil. We say they are unjust, unethical, inefficient, ineffective, and unnecessary. They are unjust because they involve theft, that is, the taking from a person by force or threat of force the value of property that is naturally theirs alone, that is, their labour and the products of their labour and capital. We say it is unethical because they make crimes of actions that are not naturally crimes, and they thus encourage deception and dishonesty. We say they are inefficient because the ease of avoidance makes them very costly to collect. We say they are ineffective because they fail to raise sufficient revenue to meet the enhanced needs their other failings engender. And we say they are unnecessary because a just, ethical, efficient and effective alternative is available. That is, collecting for the community the economic value that the whole community creates by its presence and the protections, permissions and services it provides. The most important and obvious example of this is the value that attaches to the opportunity to enjoy exclusive and protected occupation and use of a popular location, that is, location value or rent of land. Failing to collect public revenue on the basis of location value means that this location value must accrue to individuals as an unearned income or asset. As an asset, they acquire a capital value, that is, the present value of an anticipated future stream of periodic rents. Having acquired a capital value, they become objects for speculation and gambling, things that people borrow money and incur a lifelong debt to acquire. And under current banking arrangements, these debts form the basis for private money creation that is indistinguishable from legal tender. The implications of this for the monetary system are clearly very serious indeed, but this is not the subject of this briefing. Our focus is on the direct consequences of not collecting the location value as public revenue. One of the most significant consequences of allowing some individuals to keep the value that the community creates is the phenomenon of monopoly rent, whereby the possessor of the location value is able to levy an addition to the natural rent such that the occupier is obliged to pay from their earnings everything they earn that exceeds the least they are able or willing to accept under the prevailing economic conditions. From our amended diagram, we may now see how taxes and monopoly rents imposed at marginal geographical locations reduce the level of earnings at those margins and thus the general level of earnings for labour and capital throughout the whole economic community. Can you see how this has implications at every level of society? Local, regional, national and globally.